Just as a follow-on to the previous episode, which was about Michael Slater castigating ScoMo, the Prime Minister, for blocking the borders to Australian citizens. And Michael Slater saying to ScoMo, you've got blood on your hands, which no doubt ScoMo has. All right. But the episode was actually about, I think, how far do our citizenship rights go? When, for example, we're overseas, and we want to come back, how many rights do we have, that sort of thing. And it turns out that our rights are not as inalienable as I sometimes think they are. So then I start to think, well, if my citizenship rights go only so far, and at the drop of a hat, in the middle of a pandemic, for example, the government say, you can't come back to your country. If I think that's ridiculous, ScoMo can't say that, how loud do I have to yell about that and make ScoMo do what I want him to do? How loud do I have to yell? And I think the answer to that is pretty loudly. Loudly enough not to convince ScoMo, because ScoMo doesn't have as much power as I sometimes think he has. You get activists in all spheres saying, it's outrageous what you're doing, Scott Morrison. And they're trying to get through to his thick skull the idea that he has to act in the way that they think he should act. All right. And to a certain extent, activists often come across, and that includes myself, as trying to get through to ScoMo and get him to do the right thing. But it turns out you have to yell a little bit louder than that, I think, because it's not ScoMo you have to convince. It's your fellow Australians. Because ScoMo, I think, dances to their tune. And whatever your cause is, let's take Michael Slater as an example. If your cause is the right of citizens, we have a right to come back to our country. Well, it turns out you don't. But, what you're saying there is, if you're saying we have a right to this and we have a right to that, as citizens, what you're saying is, because it's not actually codified what your rights are, not very strongly. I was listening to a constitutional lawyer about this morning on the radio. Okay, so a declaration of how many rights you've got is more like a shopping list of rights you'd like to have, usually. It's like, the declaration that Black Lives Matter. They don't necessarily matter, but what you're saying there when you're saying Black Lives Matter is you're saying that you demand that they should matter. That's what you're actually saying. All right. So, how loudly does Michael Slater have to yell? Or, if you're talking activists trying to get ScoMo to move on some cause or other in the world, a foreign war, people in distress somewhere, all that sort of stuff, how loudly do you have to yell? Well, pretty loudly, because it's not ScoMo's skull you have to get through. It's not ScoMo's thick skull you have to get through. You have to get through to your fellow man. And if you haven't got a right to come back to Australia and you're overseas, I think the problem is that your fellow Australians don't want you to come back. It's not that ScoMo doesn't want you to come back, it's your fellow Australians don't want you to come back. Because this is a liberal democracy. Australia, so we haven't got a dictator. ScoMo can't make a call on anything. At best, he can get a vote going in the cabinet. He hasn't even got the right to make executive orders. Yeah. ScoMo can do next to nothing. So, when people say, I'm angry at you, ScoMo, for not doing the right thing, the people they are really angry at are their fellow Australians. They're your problem. ScoMo's not your problem. Is there some cause you're fighting for? Where Australia should be acting on the international stage, and Australia isn't? Well, the reason for that is probably it's because your fellow Australians don't want Australia acting. Your fellow Australians are not joined with you in your passion for whatever you think the Australian government should be doing. You've got to get through to your fellow man. There's your problem. And Michael Slater's got that problem. I would lay odds that he hasn't got a support. It doesn't matter whether he's got support with ScoMo or not. He hasn't got support amongst other Australians. They are a traitor to his cause, and they are probably a traitor to yours, if you're an activist watching this.